How you doing, Alex?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. I see you today, and Alex. Two Alexes.
Why do we do occasional vanilla? Is it a remembrance of when the moon was worshipped or something like that?
No, I hope not. I hope we don't worship the moon.
I know we don't anymore, but is it, just like
I think we.
the Christians have their trees that aren't really part of the tradition, but it was part of pagan worship that somehow got incorporated into their religion.
I don't think so. I don't think. But
Because the moon humbled itself. Well, I don't know. What's
we try to appreciate all of nature and say blessings to God for all of nature and the natural cycle of the moon is pretty central on our calendar. So it's connected, but not fun. Yeah, good morning. Shua made it back. Shavua Tov. We are learning the laws of Kashrut and the Kashrut of living things. 4 types of living things that the halacha discusses. One is mammals, meaning wild animals and domesticated animals. The second category is fish. Third category is birds. And the fourth category is, call them other creatures.
Insects. Like insects.
Yeah, like grasshoppers and other things that reptiles.
So halachically 4 types: the mammals, birds, fish, and other insects.
Yeah. Creepy crawlers, call them.
Marsupials.
Some of them are actually not crawling like the grasshoppers, right? So we'll call them bugs. Okay, and some of them in each category, there's some that are kosher, some that are not kosher. Now, it's hard to understand why some of them are kosher, some of them are not kosher. We said in general that the things that are not kosher, last week, if you remember, we saw a pasuk which says that if you eat the certain types of, the forbidden types of animals, then you'll be defiled, right? Like all the nations, they are eating all these other species and they're not holy. And so I'm separating you to become holy. We mentioned that there's something perhaps defiling about these animals. Some people say, throughout Jewish history, I'm talking about some Jewish philosophers, they say, if you notice, if you look at the mammals, the ones that are kosher are the herbivores, and the ones that are not kosher are the predators, are the carnivores. So the animals which are attacking others are not kosher, and so because the food that you eat, you are what you eat. You ever heard that before? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we don't want to become a predator, attacking animal, and that's one reason for why these animals are kosher and these animals are not kosher. Other people said, like famously the Rambam, right, this idea that the non-kosher species are not good for you.
I mean, a tiger doesn't taste very delicious. A cow does.
I don't know. Never had it. I don't know.
Wait, well, there's
But the Rambam, one second, let me just finish. Many people were upset at him for saying, how can you say the rules of Kashrut has something to do with your physical health? Maybe it has to do with your spiritual health, but not physical health. We see many non-Jews who eat all sorts of forbidden types of animal products, and they're not any less healthy than the Jews. So you can't just say it's a question of health. And the point of the mitzvah of the Torah is not to make us healthy, but the point is to make us holy and to make us spiritually better. And therefore, the Torah actually speaks, when it speaks about kosher and non-kosher animals, they call them tamei versus tahor, which is, we all know, ritual purity versus impurity has nothing to do with necessarily being good for you. One second. Good for you or not good for you. And the Torah actually says, let's open up Vayikra Yud Aleph. Vayikra chapter 11, verse 43. Here you go. Vayikra chapter 11, verse 43. might need a few more of those Tanachim.
Verse.
Very cool. What was it? 1143.
1143.
Okay, brother.
1143. What page?
205.
205. Read for us, Asher.
Ye shall not make yourselves abominable with any creeping thing that creepeth, neither shall ye make yourselves unclean with that ye should be defiled thereby.
So the end of that verse in Hebrew is Velo titamum behem. You should not make yourself unclean with them. Tuma, meaning ritual uncleanness. And Vinitmetem bam, you will become defiled through them. So that word is Vinitmetem bam. And it's without the aleph. The first one is, it probably means the same thing, but the drasha of Chazal is, if you eat something which is unclean, which is ritually impure, you will become mitumtam.
Defiled and
Somebody who speaks modern Hebrew knows what it means to you say to somebody who's mitumtam. Means you're an idiot.
Ah.
How do you say that again? It's an idiot.
Mitumtam. It's v'nitzmeitim bam, and the drush of Chazal and Yoma say, don't read the last words, you will become defiled by them, v'nitzmeitim bam, but v'nitamtem bam. Meaning, there are certain sins which actually, now the word tamtem comes from being closed up. The entire word of tama, tumantara, also comes from closed up. So you could say that someone is he's an idiot because he's closed off from knowledge. He doesn't have the knowledge, the vision, and your souls will become stunted by eating these foods. In other words, it seems like Chazal is saying that there's a spiritual effect of eating the non-kosher species, and because you're actually bringing in that forbidden food into your body. So in that way, we mentioned the other day that it might be worse than other actions which are forbidden from the Torah, because this has an effect on you. But ultimately, we don't know why the Torah said these parts of the mammals are prohibited and these are permitted, why these fish are allowed, these fish are not. But these drugs of Chazal seem that there's some kind of a spiritual detriment that happens to you if you eat non-kosher. Don't worry, you can always do tshuva if you have eaten something non-kosher. I imagine we all have, by accident, swallowed a bug or not known any better at some point in our lives, and I'm not saying you had pork necessarily, but some did. Some had trips, and some, we're in a place where people are bali tshuva, not everybody grew up keeping kosher, and so it has its impact. But you can do tshuva, and you're in a process of spiritual cleansing. Yes. Now I'll take your questions. Yes.
So, if you were to hypothetically, complete accident, eat non-kosher meat.
Yes.
Did you know it was unkosher?
Should you pump your stomach? No.
No, that's not my question.
It's a good question, though.
No, that's not my question. That was not my question. My question is, let's say this, you accidentally eat a non-kosher meat. Are you fleshing or anything? No, it's serious.
Good question.
Are you
Good
fleshing?
question. I hear. I'm trying to remember. I think I learned this.
Does non-kosher, my question is, does non-kosher meat count as meat?
It's a good
Let's say
question.
in the case of pikuach nefesh,
yeah.
if you eat it,
Right, absolutely.
then you have the choice of, afterwards, it's been less than 6 hours since this pikuach nefesh situation where you've eaten non-kosher meat,
Yeah.
or would you consider yourself fleshing?
I don't remember. It's a good question. I don't remember right.
What is flesh?
Meaning
Yiddish
meaty.
for masala.
Quick question, if it's just too far off.
Can you have milk in the 6 hours after eating meat? You say.
Fleshing,
Right.
yes.
Sorry. Yeah. The Hebrew word. Flesh is Yiddish.
Quick question, if this is too far of a tangent, tell me, but I happen to notice at the top of the page on 11:8, where it says, and their carcasses you shall not touch, they're unclean to you.
Right, so that's
So
that's
if I have
in
a
the law.
football, if I have a football, can I, should I only have a synthetic football, not a real football?
Not at all, because as we said when we were learning about a little bit about the laws of nida, there's two sides of the coin. That there's two, when it says a woman is teme'ah, that's essentially the context is for matters of the temple service. You can't go into the temple when you're ritually impure. But out of all of the Masechet Taharot, if anybody was with me in the fundamentals class, we learned that there's an entire one of the 6 orders of the Mishnah, which has no Talmud, because it was really impractical, because there was no more temple when the Talmud was written, and except for one section was Nida. And the Nida, because Nida has a second ramification, not only a question, is the woman or anything that she touches pure, ritually impure, and can she go into the temple? But the second side of the coin is, can her husband sleep with her or not? And that is a question is she permitted or forbidden to her husband? Same thing I'm going to tell you here. When the Torah speaks about the forbidden animals and the species, it uses the language of tumantara because there's 2 aspects. One is, after touching some of them, you're not allowed to enter the temple. You contact this ritual impurity, and that doesn't apply anymore. But the other aspect is whether or not you're allowed to eat those animals or not. It still applies, and that's the laws of kosher. So when you're quoting the verse which uses the language of you shall not touch them, that you shall not touch them and then go into the temple is what that means. But there's no problem touching pork. And then going ahead and washing your hands, make sure nothing's left on it, and then having your kosher meat sandwich. You can touch pork. We said before that you're even allowed to benefit. You can sell pork to a non-Jew. But the only what was the only forbidden food that you're not allowed to benefit from, like gain money from? What did we say? Meat and milk. Very good, meat and milk. Not the non-kosher species. You can have benefit from it and even play football with the pigskin, even though most footballs are not made with pigskin anymore. So yes, Hirsch.
So I
Yeah.
have a question regarding if you eat a sour fruit but you didn't know that there was a sour in it.
Right.
So let's say, for example, there was pork inside and you had no idea.
Right,
What
right.
does halacha say, Rabbi?
So in the time of the temple, there was actually a sacrifice that you could bring for unwittingly committing this type of sin, which there's a certain category of sin that unwittingly you would bring a korban to the Beit HaMikdash for unwittingly committing this sin. Nowadays, you have to say confession to God, say the vidui, say I'm sorry, it was an accident, and do tshuva, make sure that whatever you can, if there's anything that you have control over, you make sure that those controls are in place, that doesn't happen again. But ultimately, if it was unwittingly, then we believe that God will forgive you.
So a sour is still a sour even if you didn't know. It's just not as severe as a breaking of halacha.
Sure, committing a sin wittingly is worse than committing it unwittingly.
So it's a spectrum of those.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, we were talking about like the touching of like a pig skin or something like that. I've seen siddurim that they have like an alligator leather cover to them. So it's like
Usually it's fake.
oh,
but-
it's fake, okay.
Usually it's fake, but if it were, it'd be kosher. Why not?
Okay.
Don't eat it, but
Right. So-
hopefully you won't be eating your siddur anyways.
You have a siddur with-
Devour the words of the siddur, by all means.
I've seen this, that's hate scroll.
Some people say when you pray too quickly, people say it's like you're eating your words, you're garbling. So
Uh-huh.
that's allowed.
So are you technically, by touching that, are you technically, is there a ritual impurity attached to it?
First of all, it doesn't.
I have an example. It looks like an alligator.
No, that's awesome. It looks like awesome.
Yeah, it was sharp.
There's no, we don't have the laws of purity and impurity nowadays in any case. But in the day, it would depend. I think the dead carcass of a forbidden animal could could cause you to contract impurity and not be able to go to the temple. Yeah.
Okay.
But nowadays, we're all considered to be tamei. We assume that we've all been in touch with a dead body in some context and been in the same room as a dead body and so forth. So we're not really careful about the laws of purity and impurity today. Most people don't even know enough to be able to be careful about them. There's a lot of intricate rules. If you think there's intricate rules about kosher, there's a lot more intricate rules about ritual purity and impurity. Yeah.
Actually, once I was curious when I was studying the Islamic laws of halal regarding pork.
Okay.
And, we can touch pork and use to benefit from pork and things like that. For them, they can't even do that. They can't even a kitchen.
So it's like more.
A kitchen becomes less. A kitchen loses its halal status if there is any pork product within the kitchen.
Right.
So if you had a football in a kitchen, like there was actually an actual pig skin,
Yes.
the kitchen could still be kosher, but the kitchen could not be halal.
Interesting.
So they're actually, it's one of the very,
They're more machmir than
they're
us.
more machmir than us.
So is there any chumrot about this? Like a Haredi Jew will not have any pork related.
I'll tell you, you can't keep up with the chumrot. One second. Ariel? Yeah. There's a lot of chumrot. There's some people that will not bring into the home children's books that have pictures of the non-kosher animals.
Really? So they wouldn't go to a zoo?
So you go to a zoo, but you'd only look for the kosher animals. But you won't bring it.
Elephants?
Maybe not. Be careful. It's one thing to see it in a zoo, it's another thing to bring them home. That's an extreme position, not a halacha position. It's a custom. Okay, one second. Let's all be together so we can hear each other's questions and answers.
But to clarify, we can benefit from pigs, football or whatever,
100%.
but we can't own a pig farm, right?
Why not? If you're not going to cause any Jews to, a Jew shouldn't really be selling non-kosher products because usually you end up, you'll eat it yourself, or to be a vendor. There's other issues with being a vendor, but in terms of legally owning non-kosher food, there's nothing wrong with that.
So it's recommended against, but it's mutar.
Yeah, you could say that. It depends on the context, of course. What exactly you're speaking about?
North Carolina, the state I'm from, is one of the biggest pork producers in the U.S.
Right.
And so, I mean, I just curious, there were pig farmers that I knew in the state, and that's just what they did. That was the thing. They weren't Jewish.
Right.
But they would sell. One of the largest sellers of pork to China comes from North Carolina.
Okay.
And so, can you be an investor in a farm like that?
I don't see why not. It says you shouldn't be a pork farmer in the land of Israel. And that's actually a law on the books of the Israeli secular law that you're not allowed to grow or import pork products. This is because pork
I
became.
heard that they grow them, they raise them on platforms, they're technically not on the land of Israel.
Right, there's
Is
all
that true? Is
sorts
that
of-
correct, or is that false?
I think that might be true. There's all sorts of ways around it, and you can get. It's called in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, it's called. It's not called that.
No?
It's called basar lavan.
White meat, yeah.
It's a euphemism because they don't want to call it pork. Because everybody who's even a secular Jew, who's any connection to Judaism, will be shocked and disgusted at the thought that basar lavan. That's not the same thing. It's chazer, right? Chazer is pork. In any case, pork has become something that's not kosher, that's disgusting, and we'll see why. We'll discuss it in just a minute. It's a very unique animal out of the mammals, and in it, why it's not considered to be kosher. But for whatever reason, historically, it's considered to be anathema to the Jews, and of course, it's forbidden to eat. But it has a symbolic value or association with it, more powerful than just the rule of law that it's forbidden like any other thing. Okay. Well, we'll get to it in just a few minutes. But somebody else had a question here. Yeah. No.
Yeah, I just want to continue with that point, but I have another question. The first thing, if you say that in Eretz Israel, the selling of pork or, farming of pigs is illegal.
Yeah, it's a rabbinic law and a modern Israeli law.
But why is there so many shops where there's?
Yeah.
That's
And there's also fun.
It's important.
Yeah,
A lot of it's
I'll tell you,
important.
God works in mysterious ways. And why do I say that? This is because God sent us into the exile.
I went into one of the shops.
God sent us into exile, the Jewish people, and all different types of exile, different countries, different places. And with his great faithfulness, after thousands of years, he started to bring us back. And he brought back, as he promised by his prophets, he's bringing back his people from all the four corners of the world, north to south, east and west. And many of the people that were unfortunately exiled were far away from Jewish communities, and some were forced to assimilate by government decree. And so that what's left of them, other than miraculously holding on to their Jewish lineage, is very little in terms of Jewish knowledge and culture. And so you have many Jews coming back to the land of Israel who are purebred Jews. And they mother after mother after mother, they're Jewish people. They know nothing about their heritage. And culturally, they are very much a part of where they grew up. They're not culturally Jewish. They don't know anything about Judaism, but biologically they're Jewish. So we're very happy for them to come back to the land of Israel, and we're rebuilding the state of Israel with them. But they come with their culture. And if you came from a country where, North Carolina, for example, where pork was what everybody eats, or I'll tell you, a lot of people
I did not eat it, by the way.
No, amazing, good for you. If you come from Russia, a lot of the Russian Jews who survived miraculously 70 years of Stalinist regime, communist regime, where you were not allowed to practice your religion, they're, for all intents and purposes, they're Russian nationalists, and they don't know much about their Judaism, and so they come to Israel and they miss the food they're used to. The food they're used to includes pork, and so they very much, until hopefully one day they'll learn more about their Jewish heritage and they'll appreciate that they should stop eating pork. They want to have what they're used to, and so they start to import. And as we had in the 90s, an influx of about 1 million or over 1 million Jews from Russia, they brought with them their eating habits. And it's not only them, there's also foreign workers from China, there's foreign who eat everything, right? And then there's foreign workers from all different countries around the world, and they have their eating habits, and they want to continue to eat here, so they're bringing it in, whether it's legal, illegal, all sorts of ways. So it's much more prevalent than it was 30 years ago, much more prevalent than it was. When the state of Israel was founded, there was really no pork to be found in Israel. But now, together with the ingathering of the exile, this is one of the byproducts that we have to deal with, and we have to fight against it. Of course, we want to teach everybody to keep the laws of the Torah, but we're not there yet. And so people are still eating what they eat. That's the context I like to put it in.
Yeah, and regarding the topic regarding So what I remember was this is a custom that we have, like in India. If a woman is nida, not only is but we don't allow the women to get inside the kitchen. So I just want to, I don't have any reference to it, but that is the custom that we have been following.
Right.
They are not allowed to even touch something which is perishable, like vegetables or flowers. So I used to ask my grandma, why would you do that? Because I used to be against, studying university and stuff like that. I don't believe in stuff, but my mom said, don't just say, this is a custom we have, and just see, you might not believe it, but just see if a woman who is in Nida and touch something like that, it gets ruined or it gets perished.
Right. So
more than earlier than that time.
Yeah.
And it does happen that way. Is there any Gemara or any reference that talks about women not?
So it runs deep. This concept of this ritual impurity is very, very ancient, and it continues in many societies. I remember I was involved in the 80s when the big wave of Ethiopian Jews were brought over, and many of them were keeping the Nida laws, but differently than when we do following the Talmudic tradition. And they had a separate home for the woman for menstruating for that time of the month. When she was menstruating, she would live at home and definitely not work in the kitchen and touch things. And halachically, it's not true. Halachically, we don't have the laws of purity and impurity. It's only about, is she permitted to sleep with her husband or not permitted to sleep with her husband? And that's the way Judaism has been practiced for thousands of years, is that menstruating women prepare the food in the kitchen and everybody eats it, and there's no impurity which is transferred over to the food. But it's good to respect these traditions kept Judaism alive, and these other people that were disconnected from halachic Judaism we practice. So we give it respect, but ultimately, what's binding is the halachic tradition, where that's not true. That a menstruating woman can touch food and drink, and nothing bad happens to it. There's an element of sort of spiritual impurity, which we still preserve somewhat, and that is the ritual impurity, not associated with menstruation, not even associated with death. Believe it or not, you guys all know about it. It's a ritual impurity associated with overnight, sleeping at night. So if you wake up in the morning and you don't wash your hands first, you shouldn't touch food, you shouldn't touch drink. It ruins the food. There is such a tradition, and that's why some people are careful to wash their hands first thing, even right next to their bed. They have a little basin with a washing cup right next to the bed. Others say, as long as you're in the same building, you can walk to the bathroom, wash your hands, but the first thing you do before you touch anything should be, but again, that's not a biblical law, that's a custom based on the Talmud, that there is this kind of a spiritual impurity, sort of dangerous type of impurity, which devolves upon your hands. But that's nothing to do with the kosher law, it's nothing to do with menstruating. That's a separate idea of spiritual impurity of the nighttime, demons, and those kind of things. Yes, Alex.
I don't want to get too off topic, but is one, like, the idea of one not being able to touch his wife during Nida, not just sleeping with her, but
this is halachic. This is Talmudic, absolutely. Yeah. It's based on a pasuk. Some of the commentators explain that this is a biblical prohibition. Why? Because when the Torah says do not sleep with your wife who's menstruating, it doesn't say do not sleep with her. It says doesn't say do not touch her. It says do not come close to sleeping with her. So what does it mean to come close? So the rabbis defined rabbinically. Some people say it's rabbinically. Some people say they're just channeling what the Torah meant. What the Torah meant was do not come. That anything that's going to bring you into close intimacy with your wife when she's forbidden is also forbidden biblically. So it's not only the act of intercourse, but it's hugging and kissing, and from there any type of touching which shows endearing type of intimate touch. The Rambam seems to think that it's biblically prohibited to touch your wife and give her a kiss, not only sleeping with her. Well, other commentators, they disagree. They say it's only rabbinic, it's a fence, but that is clearly part of the Talmudic tradition, that not only is it you're not allowed to sleep in the same bed as your wife, you're not allowed to touch her, and so forth. We'll go around the room. I see there's lots of questions. This is a great topic. Hirsch, what would you want to ask?
So kind of a true question. So you were mentioned that there were people who came back to Israel and they were objectively Jewish mother, all of that.
Yes.
Could they be analogized to Joseph, who he talked like an Egyptian, ate like an Egyptian, dressed like an Egyptian, looked like an Egyptian, but was deep down a Jew, or were they even disconnected even further?
I'd like to say that Yosef was more connected. I don't think he was so assimilated that he didn't remember, because, this week's parsha, right? Last week's parsha, he reveals himself and he reconnects to his family and he brings them back and he speaks about his father's house, and so I wouldn't say that Yosef was so assimilated. His children maybe were going in that direction, but okay, we'll go and ask other questions. I want to give everybody a chance. David, go ahead.
You were clear that the Ethiopian Jews are in fact Jewish, but you're saying that their halakha is wrong. My question is, with Sephardic and Ashkenaz, we simply say, well, one group holds one way and one holds the other. Why do we say with the Ethiopians that it's wrong as opposed to merely that they're following the tradition that they have? And if so, could that affect though they're being Jewish? Because if it's not merely different customs, then maybe all of their marriages, all of their divorces, everything else are outside of halakha, and
They follow more.
who knows what happens?
It's a good question, the question of how to define the lineage of the Ethiopian Beit Yisrael, as it's called, this community of Jews in Ethiopia, is a big question. We're not going to talk about it now, but the difference in terms of them versus Sephardim versus Ashkenazim is that the Sephardim and Ashkenazim, they both separated from the Jewish people, from the central land of Israel, after the Talmud. So the Talmud reached, and the Talmudic learning and discussions. So I often tell my students, the basic book of Judaism is not the Tanakh. The basic book of Judaism is the Talmud. And so Ashkenazim and Jews and Sephardim and all the Jews in very different countries, they all scattered, but the Talmud reached them. And they all based their Judaism on reading and understanding the Talmud and bringing that to implementation and living through the rabbinic period of the Second Temple and after the Second Temple. Whereas Ethiopian Jews, for example, even if they are, descendants of a tribe, they left in First Temple times before, and they were out of touch since then. So as Judaism developed, they didn't really get any of those traditions, and perhaps they had some oral law, but it wasn't really defined and developed as the rest of the Jewish people did in the Second Temple period.
But therefore, what they do would not be considered a separate minhag?
Correct. It would not. We practice our Judaism based on the Talmud, not on the Bible only. Okay. And another question. Yes, Moshe.
So, if it's okay for me to tangent back a little bit to, we were talking about nida, would bunk beds be acceptable?
It's a good question. One of the principles is that I believe it's actually a very smart principle. We're not going to talk about it at length, but I'm saying smart, not that I'm giving out grades to Chazal, but I mean that psychologically it's very helpful when you love your wife and you usually have a physical side to your relationship. It's very hard to stop for 2 weeks a month and to not be physically intimate. And so some of the laws of the rabbis are called harchakot, things which separate you. The rabbis instituted all sorts of separations, all sorts of practices which you should avoid, not only touching, but also other things. And this one of not sitting on the same bed or not sleeping in the same bed, it has to do with, it's worse if one can feel the other one move. So you're going to be attracted to each other. You're going to be feeling each other's movements. And I think a bunk bed, most bunk beds, you feel when the other person gets on. And so that's why couches are not ideal either. And that's why in many religious homes, you may not have thought of this yet, you'll see that there's actually a love seat, it's called, or a one-seater, as well as a couch. Because there's some times in the month where the couples will not be sitting on the same couch because it's forbidden. It's like sitting on the same bed. But those are more details of the laws of Nida. One day, B'ezrat Hashem, you'll get married soon, Moshe, and you'll learn all the laws and you'll put them into practice. Renan, go ahead.
Just a question about kosher food.
Oh, kosher food. What a great idea. We should go back to talking about kosher food, the topic of our lesson. Yeah, go ahead.
If we are in an external situation, like in Russia or famine, and they not allowed to feed, so we can eat non-kosher food to not die actually.
Yeah. When, if it's a question of life or death, of course, it pushes off all the laws of the Torah, except for the big three, right? Mm-hmm. But not eating non-kosher food is not one of the big three, and so, yeah, unfortunately, my father, when he was a young child, he had to eat non-kosher food. He was a refugee from Hitler, And his father died when he was young, and so he was an orphan essentially. His mother was left with 5 children, and in the middle of the war in Siberia, actually it was Pakistan, was where he died, and so they had a soup kitchen that they had to go to. It's a non-kosher soup kitchen, but that's the best they could do. So yeah, it happens, unfortunately. But it's a good question. It's a good question. Not for now, but it does happen. But many people go to tremendous lengths. I know of Jews who lived in countries where there was no kosher meat, and so they became vegetarian. For many, many years, they just didn't eat any meat because they knew that they couldn't have kosher food, so they didn't have any meat. It's tremendous dedication, but it's hard. It's hard. Do the best you can, and only if it's pikuach nefesh, then of course, they, as I said, there were times of starvation. I have a picture of what they looked like in those days, very, very thin and very, not so simple. Yeah. Okay, should we move on a little bit? What do you say? We have 2 minutes left.
It isn't mutar to grow pigs on the soil of Eretz Israel. That's be like a platform, and they can't be. Can they be imported from those people? So they can't be.
Rabbinic law prohibits growing non-kosher animals in the land. Yes, I believe we're going to get into it. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Alex.
I've got a question on the purity thing that we were discussing.
Sure.
So in the Beit HaMikdash, we have that again, and we're gonna have to follow all these laws of purity again. So is it not a good idea to learn them and maybe start reintroducing them so that we don't have it all come on us all at once and we'll all be ignorant of these laws?
I like your thinking, definitely future thinking. And the truth is, a lot of rabbis have said that we should start to think to prepare for the Beit HaMikdash. Most of them focus first on the laws of the actual temple and less on the laws of purity and impurity, just because it's a whole nother ballgame. It's really very difficult. And you're right, though. One thing is connected to the other. And it's good to study the laws to make sure that one day we'll be able to practice them. 100%. It's a good idea. The problem is that, there's limited time and we have enough trouble learning the laws of kosher. As a matter of fact, this class, we tried to progress in the laws of Kashrut. We didn't get too far, and the class is already over, and we're going to leave it here.
I think it was a great class, though, because there's a deep connection between food and marital relations.
Okay.
Wait, if someone's heart.
That's interesting. Once again, you got to share this with us.
Well, I mean, they go together. They hit the same wavelength in the brain. In the beginning, God and done, is the first prohibition is food, and then you've got be fruitful.
Let me help you. I think you're right, but I think that they're both basic needs of the human being.
Yeah.
Both basic needs. The drive for and they're the greatest drives that we have. The drive to eat and the drive for sex is a pretty basic drives in the human being.
But the question is, do we treat them as if an animal would?
Well, that's why we have so many laws about kashrut and so many laws about marital relations. And I understand the great interest in the laws of marital relations. Usually we'll leave that another course, usually when you're about to get married. But it's a very big, lots of laws of kashrut, lots of laws of kosher sex. But we'll leave that for another day. Have a great one.
Thank you.